So now let's talk a bit more about different types of bonds. Okay, so in chapter 5 we had assumed that there was only one bond, but of course an economy will have lots of bonds, hundreds and thousands of different bonds, and bonds differ on their maturity, on their yield, on their risk, etc., etc. But we are going to only focus on risk. Okay, so what is risk? Now when you are buying a bond, what you are expecting is that you're going to give money to a company, let's say, or the government who are issuing the bond, and they will give you a document, and then at the end of a year, or however long the maturity period is, you're going to return the bond to them, and they will pay you some money plus interest. Now risk are of two types. Okay, uh, one is the default risk, and the other, of course, we have to talk about risk aversion. So default risk is that the fact that you've given money to some company or the government, what is the guarantee that at the end of the maturity period, 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, however they may be, what is the guarantee that at the end of that period, they will pay you back the amount plus interest? This varies from company to company. Government bonds are generally assumed to be the safest. That's why they pay low interest. They're usually called no risk bonds. But then if you go to certain companies, okay, so if someone like Apple or Microsoft begins to issue bonds, these are pretty safe bonds. Not 100% secure, but they're pretty safe. But then, I mean, just look around you. Think of Italy, for example. If Italy was issuing bonds, how secure would you feel knowing that 1 year later, uh, they may or may not pay you back? So what you would demand is very high interest for taking this very high risk. And that's how default risk works, is that as the risk of default goes up, the interest rate that you demand also goes up. If you want to take higher risk, you will have to be compensated by higher payment. And then there's also risk aversion, is that different people are willing to take different levels of risk. So some people may be very happy buying an Apple bond. It's very safe. Someone else might say, no, I don't trust Apple. Most people will not be willing to buy an Italy bond. But someone may say, all right, I'm willing to take the risk if they pay me high enough interest. So different people have different levels of risk aversion. People who like to take a lot of risk are said to have low aversion to risk, and people who do not like taking risks are said to have very high aversion to risk. Okay, so what we are going to do now is we're going to break down. Let me just write the equation first, and then I will explain. Plus I plus x plus p times 0. Okay. IT, you guys all know what that is. This is interest. Remember in chapter 5, we had assumed no risk. Is that if you are buying a bond, the bond will pay out on time and the amount that you expect. So IT is interest on riskless bond. There is no risk. X is the risk premium. So as risk goes up, you demand a higher interest rate. So therefore, I plus X together gives us interest on risky bonds. So if x is 0 and there is no risk, then you pay I, and then as x begins to go up, as risk begins to go up, the interest that you pay, I plus x, begins to go up. And then of course there is P, which is the probability of default. So if P is 0.2, that means there is a 20% chance that this bond will not pay out. If it's a riskless bond, then of course P is 0. There is no possibility, probability that the borrower will fail to pay back. So now let's look at this equation. Okay, so 1 minus P is the probability that you will get paid. So for example, if P is 0.2, 1 minus P is 0.8. So there is an 80% probability that you will be paid 1 plus I plus X percent interest. And there is a P or a 20% probability that there will be a default and you will earn nothing. Okay, and this is going to be equal to the riskless bond. So if we simplify this a bit, and it's just simple algebra, you guys can do it as well. What we get is x is equal to 1 plus I P 1 minus P. What this means is, let's come up with a scenario. Suppose the nominal interest rate on riskless bond is, let's say, 5%. Okay, the risk of default on a bond that you want to buy, suppose a value bond. Okay, so there is a 50% chance that they will not pay back, and 50% chance that they will pay back. So if you can buy a riskless bond, 0 risk, and they will pay you 5%. If you want to buy a bond that 50%, there is a 50% chance that it will not pay out, what is the risk premium that you are going to demand? That is going to be equal to, just plug it into this equation, 1.05 divided by P is going to be, what's gone wrong here? 0.5. Hold on, I just need to check a few things. So where did the equation go? Right, this equation. So P is 0.5 divided by 1 minus P, also 0.5. So the risk premium is 1.05. So what will be the interest on this risky bond that you're trying to buy? I plus X is equal to be 0.05 plus 1.05, which is 1.10, which is effectively 110%. So what that means is that if you can buy a riskless bond which will pay you 5%, and you're considering buying a bond that may not pay out 50% of the time, to buy that bond, you are going to demand, because you're taking higher risk, you are going to demand 110% interest. Let's just give another example. Same scenario. Riskless bond will pay you 5%, and you're considering buying a bond that's, let's make it even more risky. Okay, or actually let's make it more realistic. So suppose you're trying to buy bonds issued by a company which is fairly reliable, but it's never 100% guaranteed that they will pay. So let's say there is a small 5% chance that they may not pay, 5% default risk. So to take this 5% default risk, what is the extra interest rate that you are going to demand? That is, so once again, we go back to this equation. So 1 plus 0.05 divided by P, right? P. So P is 0.05 divided by 1 minus P. So 0.95. And this will be equal to, so I'm just going to get my calculator out. So this is 0.055. Okay, this is what we get. So this is the extra risk premium you will demand. So the interest that you will demand from this bond that has a 5% default risk is I is 0.05 plus extra premium that you're demanding is 0.06. So you get 0.11 or effectively 11%. So what that means is that if you can buy a riskless bond for 5% interest, and then someone offers you a bond that's going to pay, but that has associated 5% default risk that you may not get paid at all at the end of the period, what you are going to say is, for me to take this extra risk, I will also have to get an extra risk premium of, over here, of 5.5%. So 5% plus 5.5% equals to, I mean, we've rounded up here. If I kept it at 5.55. So what we would see is that you will require a 10.5% interest. So that's the extra interest you demand to take the extra risk.